Welcome into another episode of They've Got Now. I'm really excited to be joined today by someone I've been wanting to connect with for a while, so I'm glad that we could make this happen. Obviously, a big time season for Davidson in a multitude of ways that we're going to get into, but I'm really excited to be joined today by Gayle Coats Fulks, who has been doing tremendous stuff at Davidson, which is now, you guys just wrapped up year 7. What is that kind of feeling like? We don't have to dive into it fully yet, but,
Yeah.
sitting going like, wow, I'm getting ready for year 8. What is that feeling like a little bit?
It's really refreshing. I think that, I took over a program, 7 years ago and, I knew I was taking over a rebuild. So we knew it would take a little bit of time. And then like all of a sudden this thing called COVID hit and it just made everything different, and at a place like Davidson where you don't have grad school, kids are really four-year kids. We didn't have some of the shortcuts to sort of like getting old quick or being able to have grad transfers or some of that during that stretch. So I would say our build sort of just slowed down a little bit just due to the landscape of things changing. But now as things are balancing a little bit out, I think we're one of the like healthier programs where I'm not having to call a gazillion people out of the transfer portal or, completely overturn my, roster or coaching staff. We've just really settled in and have a great group and, they're just so much fun to be around. It's really rewarding to get to be around these people all the time.
Yeah, especially seeing the way that you guys went through, especially early on in the year and how everything hit. And I think it's just clear like where you guys are at and where you guys are headed. And I think part of what I'm so excited for with next year, like you guys are not going to have quite as much turnover compared to what the rest of the A10 has looked like, which as much as I mean, it's kind of like an interesting dichotomy because I mean, the A10 was probably my favorite conference to watch this year, just like from top to bottom, it was so crazy competitive. And now I'm like, the conference is just going to look so drastically different next year, which is what makes it interesting. But um, I mean, I guess to back it up a little bit and ask, like, obviously you played at Fairleigh Dickinson, went right into coaching afterwards, where you just kind of like, you knew in your blood, you're like, I want to coach. Like, that's what I'm going to do. That's where I want to be.
Yeah.
It just happened right away.
For me it was, I kind of joke and tell the story, but when I was 5 years old, I was like the biggest Muggsy Bogues fan of all time.
That's
And
hilarious.
this was back when you actually like were looking in the newspaper at box scores, and like little write-ups. And I remember every morning I'd come down to eat my Cheerios or something and or my Lucky Charms, whatever I was eating back then. And I'd come down and be like, Daddy, can I see the newspaper? Let's see what Muggsy did last night. And I remember being 5 and being like, if they lost, it was the coach's fault. And if they won, it was because Muggsy like was the best guy ever. And so even from an early age, I was kind of criticizing coaches, which is kind of funny. But it's kind of in my blood. My dad was a coach, and so I kind of grew up around it, being involved with basketball, and I actually started coaching kind of on the side, just with my dad, when I was like a freshman in high school, and
Mhm.
actually my own team my senior year of high school in AAU, and had a team every summer. Knew what I wanted to do. My mom kind of argued a little bit with me, saying you can't do basketball forever, but I knew what I wanted to do, and really centered a lot of my decisions around being able to do that. And so for me, it was never in question. That's what I wanted to do. So
No, I love that. Why Muggsy? What had Muggsy
the
Bogues
little
as your
guy,
player?
man, the little
Yeah,
guy, I just, you know, uh 5'3", playing in the NBA. I think I've always kind of had a little bit of that underdog in my blood. But I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't, whatnot. But I was like, if Muggsy can do it, I can definitely do this. Like, I'm like 5'8", so but growing up in Charlotte for a few years, like that was kind of the good Hornets. So it was Muggsy, Larry Johnson, Lonzo Mourning. It was probably the glory days of any Hornets basketball. But it was a cool time to be like a little kid loving basketball in the city. So
absolutely. As a random shot through, the next couple of years of the Hornets after that is like that's my favorite Hornets group when it became
mhm.
like I'm trying to remember who the coach was right now. I think it might have been Paul Silas. Was it Paul Silas?
Probably,
Silas or whoever it
yeah.
was right after him. But like Glenn Rice is one of my favorite
Yeah.
dudes to watch highlights of, like just one of the most insane shooters of all time. Like
Mhm.
because he had that it was like 96, 97. He shot like 47% from deep on like 7 or 8
Mhm.
a game. Like hard to beat.
Well, yeah, and I mean the cool thing too was, Del Curry was on that team as the shooter like back during my time. And so like I kind of grew up being like a Del Curry fan and then obviously got to follow Steph. We were in college around the same time. And then,
Mhm.
coming here, like it was just like, oh yeah, like I've been following like the Currys forever,
Yeah.
type of thing. So yeah, but definitely a lot of roots growing up in Charlotte for a few years. And then, I spent a lot of time in Richmond too. So
Yeah, definitely. No, I love that. Obviously, I know you went to UNC Greensboro for a little bit, and then at Wake Forest with Jen Hoover, and I know like that's where you and James Jansen, who I know pretty well, I know that's where you guys first got together and met.
Mhm.
What was getting to be an assistant at a Power Five school like when you start, kind of like obviously it's an elevation when you get there, and it's a different atmosphere. So, what was kind of the biggest thing that you learned from that? And obviously, there's a million things I'm sure, but like when you first get there, what's maybe the biggest difference going to, being at an ACC program?
Yeah, for me, I was really fortunate that Jen Hoover kind of took a chance on me. I didn't have like the most extensive resumes of things. But getting there and kind of being in a high academic environment, at a place like Wake that was pretty intimate, private school, smaller campus, to me, just getting exposed to that level of things. Like I'd always worked really hard when I was at Longwood, UNC Greensboro, and realized, hey, I didn't play at Tennessee or UConn, right? So I'm going to have to like really earn kind of my reputation in our profession. But getting there, I just really realized how important creativity and innovation was. Like working hard was one thing, but like actually being better than others is actually really like what that next step looked like. And so, when you're at a lower major, you're just kind of trying to make sure the pizza's there and make sure, all the like the bus and like you don't have as much time to be critically thinking about how can I make this great. You're just actually doing too many tasks. And so when I got to Wake, I really got to focus in on really the basketball and recruiting, after doing a lot of other administrative things, and really kind of got my gears turning of like, well, what does like great look like? What's like optimal? What's the best way to do something as opposed to, hey, just getting like a checklist done. And so Jen really allowed me to grow a lot, get a lot of experience, on the court with high level players, and exposed me to some of the best coaches in the nation, people that are doing big, big, big things consistently. So I think that's what I really got out of that experience at Wake that prepared me, I thought, well for, this next step here at Davidson.
Yeah, and I think part of what's so interesting too, like I don't know if you feel it all the time, but you're still very young for a head coach, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Like
Yeah.
for anybody, like I can't because I don't know. I think when I was younger, I used to think about it all the time, like, yeah, you can do that when you're 30. But now that I'm 26 and I think about it, I'm like, I can't imagine doing all of that stuff. Like, if I'm like 4 years from now for me, like I can't imagine being the head of a program. Like that's a lot. So how did you kind of know when Davidson became a possibility in 2017, like that's the step you wanted to take and that you knew was the right job for you.
Yeah, I think kind of people joke, but like being an assistant is pretty different than being a head coach. But I did feel like a lot of the like AAU stuff I was doing, like when I was like the head coach at 18 of, a bunch of girls and I had to put practice together and figure out in-game adjustments and talk to people, communicate. Like I got just a lot of reps really early on in my career, to kind of figure out who I was in a leadership capacity, right? And
Mm.
so I refined that being an assistant for about 10 years, and really kind of locked and dialed in on the high academic side of things, feeling like, hey, this is the type of kid I really want to be around, and that I myself am a great fit for. Just as far as, I think there's just not that many places where you should be the best person for a program, right? And for me, Davidson really became that place where it was a comfortable place being, growing up some in Charlotte, being in a small, intimate, community, similar to how it was at Wake Forest, being at a high academic school, and then really being a basketball school too. I've never really been into the whole college football thing as far as like that being what I viewed college as. I didn't go to a school like that. And so for me, being at really a basketball focused school, was something that was very important to me.
Definitely. So when you first take that job, what is the process like? Like how do you set up? Because like you mentioned, you knew it was going to be a rebuild coming in. So what does that look like? Like when you sit down and you're like, okay, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. Like how do you kind of go about actually, making the vision a reality?
Yeah, and one thing for me is that I was very committed to learning kind of what made Bob McKillop on the men's side very successful. So
Mhm.
I was like, hey, this guy's been here a long time in women's basketball at Davidson. They had not had long-term success with the coach. They didn't have a rich history like they had on the men's side. And I kind of just really like critically thought about it from that lens of like, okay, what does it look like to be successful at Davidson? And and just observing and getting a chance to talk with Coach McKillop, it became very clear that, a certain style of play is going to be important, right? Like something that people can get better at over 4 years. You're not going to have the roster turnover because a lot of people really enjoy their time at Davidson, and high academic, we're going to be a niche school. So to me, it was about building a program and building a system of play, a style of play that I could see kids getting better at over time. We also don't have summer school, right? So in the summers, we don't have kind of that built-in time to like hold somebody's hand through getting better. We have to have a very clear way of how we're going to play to allow them to get better, while they're away from us. So we really focused on dialing and recruiting, and really building our recruiting through that style of play lens. In that first little bit, we really did prioritize kind of building a staff that was really all on the same page. And so we spent a lot of time meeting, just trying to really shore up our language. We felt like at Davidson, if there was a question to be asked because something wasn't clear, they were going to ask 10 million questions. So we wanted to be really clear from the get-go to try to provide that clarity. And, it worked. We were pretty good that first year and kind of just continued to get better as we went along. But I think it was all built from the lens of, hey, these are our constraints. Like these are the things that make Davidson unique, and let's not be mad about it, but let's embrace it, kind of from A to Z. And, that was kind of the way we looked at it.
Definitely. That makes a ton of sense. And I think, like you mentioned with the recruiting part and knowing like, because I mean, it is really fascinating about just how different recruiting is now compared to not even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way all of that's changed. But when you're talking about like knowing like, okay, we're going to have to be a place that like really prioritizes being able to grow somebody over 4 years. How does that change the way you go about recruiting, or does it? Or like, what does that kind of look like? And maybe how has that evolved more over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think when we sign a kid, we expect it to be like a 4-year growth process, and I think that it's getting a little bit harder to like really kind of sell that because it is a lot easier to transfer out or in now that you don't have to sit a year. Davidson really couldn't be involved in the transfer market previously because we didn't have grad school.
Mhm.
Whereas, now, when kids can play right away, they're not losing, an opportunity for a master's or something. They're just kind of continuing their career here. And so for us, it's changed a little bit, but I wouldn't say that much. Like we're trying to find kids from anywhere in the world that fit Davidson's like academic culture, our basketball like philosophy and program. And really are people we want to be around every day. We do spend a lot of time, and I do think that that part of like being connected and unified is really important.
I mean, speaking of around the world, like obviously you guys have a pretty big Australian base. I don't remember who I was talking to, but they said St. Mary's East when
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
you guys. So yeah, I mean, is that just James, or in general, how has the Aussie base come along
Yeah,
since
it's
then?
really cool. So when I was at Wake Forest, James sort of like showed up on the doorstep as like a guy in grad school that wanted to help out with the team. And very quickly I realized that I really connected with him. I thought he was really bright. I thought that, we were around the same age, similar life situations, where it was just like pretty easy to just kind of get along. And I learned a lot from him. And he was like, hey, like I really think we need to like you should go to Australia and like take a look at some of these kids. Like they're better than the kids that are kind of on our team right now. Like I think they could play here. I think they could help. And I was out over there coaching. So James said, hey, I'm over here coaching, and these are the 4 kids that are like high academic that we could probably go and get. And so I went over when I was at Wake as an assistant 6 times over that like kind of 5-year period. And I'll remember like to the day like I die, just the first time I walked into a gym in Australia, I like looked around and I was like, oh my goodness, like, wow, this is so much different because the kids are playing on 24-second shot clocks. I mean, you got 12 and under kids playing on 12 or 24-second shot clocks. It's just the volume of decisions that they are so much better at sometimes than some of the players over here in America because of just having a shot clock, consistently. But I went over there and just really fell in love with the style of play, kind of the toughness that a lot of those kids have. And I said, hey, like if I ever become a head coach, A, James, I hope you come with me. But B, I really want to build, around kind of a more international style. And we felt like, Australia was a good place to start, obviously with him being Australian. But now we've expanded into trying to get into some other countries too. So, really it's some of it's style of play, some of it's, you know, we do have kind of a global brand with Steph Curry and Davidson College. And
Mhm.
so to me, it's we'll go anywhere, anywhere to find kids that really fit the way we want to play.
I love that. And it's so interesting too, because like one of the things that I'm always fascinated by, like obviously like, I think anybody, regardless of where you're at, you have to recruit hard and recruit well. But especially when you're at a smaller school, like I think so much of it is about like finding, the right opportunities in the right places that maybe you're getting under recruited. And I think maybe we'll see more teams start to get into it, but like recruiting that group of Australians that are like, okay, it's funny because like one of the first times I started talking to James was about Charlize, so I'll definitely ask you about it in a minute. But
Yeah.
I was like, that's a player. I'm like, she could be a pro someday with what she has in her skill set. Like I've seen stuff from, when she was playing, for like the whatever you want to call the young opals. But like, exactly. Like I think if there's, when you find that group that isn't going right to the WNBL or is going to come over and or it could play college or they would be playing WNBL one instead of going to the WNBL. Like that's a really interesting group to dive into because like exactly like you're saying, they're coming up in a much stronger youth system than ours currently. Like that's the wild part about how America's set up right now, with at least basketball wise, because
Yeah.
not the I think AAU gets a very poor rap sometimes. I think there's really good stuff in AAU, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, like on either side, there's always going to be something. But I think just talking and getting to know a bunch of players who have come through the youth system in Australia, like it's so set up and regimented from like exactly what you said from like 12U up. And that's very different.
Yeah, and I think the advantage that some of those international kids is, it's not just Australian, but the international kids is that, they're kind of playing their age group for a while, and then they kind of prove that they're like the best in their age group, and then they, get involved with a club and maybe now become a developmental player for, a pro team. And so now all of a sudden they go from being like the guy or the woman, on their like 16 and under team to now being on a team with like pros where like if you're not paying attention in a drill, like these women just like kind of kick you off the court, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you get a completely different skill set development at a much earlier age of like focusing and listening and detail and because otherwise like they just actually kick you, they just don't invite you back to practice. It's like it's pretty quick. And then you have to join, teams to be on the state team, and you got to go make a team where it's a brand new coach and you have to adapt. I think some of the problems that we see, particularly in the United States, is these kids only play for one person all the time. So they're not getting this exposure to different ways. And sometimes when you don't get that exposure, you get maybe too comfortable and you don't grow and you're not challenged to maybe do some things you don't naturally do well. And, when you get to a college team, you might be the best shooter ever, but it's going to be maybe taking charges that get you on the floor, right? And so, or passing the ball to a great post player that's going to actually get you on the floor. And so you got to be able to do a lot of different stuff. And I think that's why international kids, at least with the way we play, have had a little bit more of a seamless transition. But I think Americans are really coming along with that too. I think there's a lot of great American players that are really kind of diving into being a little bit more modern with their shot selection and things too. So.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, it was funny because I was catching up on all of Chipotle Nationals,
Yeah.
and I knew that you guys had a player on IMG, and I hadn't gotten to watch IMG yet because I'm just like now I'm starting to catch up to all of high school stuff now that the college season's over and I have time. But I before I even like knew who it was, I was like, oh, I think it's Sienna Dower. I'm pretty sure it's
Yep.
Sienna Dower. And so for people, it's definitely something to be excited about moving
Yeah,
forward. I think she's going to really fit you guys and what you do.
for sure.
Um, but I mean, talking on that play style, which is what I really want to dive into, like, has it evolved since you guys have been there, or like, what was this kind of what you envisioned right when you first got in?
Yeah, on the offensive side, we haven't evolved that much. I think we've changed and tweaked things, but the framework that we decided to kind of build around has been sort of the framework that we've stuck to, and we've recruited relentlessly to it, and really haven't compromised in taking players that we don't feel like are going to be great fits in what we do. And so when we got here, we're like, all right, we really want players that can pass. To me, James and I talk about it a lot, but it's like if you can't pass, you can't play.
Yeah,
Because if somebody's wide open and you can't find them, like I don't like that's the goal of offense is to get an open shot, right? Is to get something open, and you need people that can find those people. And then really the shooting side, it's like, all right, well, if you can't shoot, open shots, because we want to shoot open shots, we got a beautiful practice gym. You can go in there whenever you want and practice shooting open. We're not talking about, shooting, contested shots. I know a lot of people are like, oh, do a lot of contested shooting drills. Like we don't. Like we want an open shot. Like when we tell our players, if you're open, you have to shoot the ball. That's the way we want to play. And so those two things like were really like kind of, things we felt like we had to have. And then, having players that can kind of slide up and down positionally, like having enough ball handling, have enough shooting, passing at all different sizes is helpful. But kind of having forwards and guards, but being able to invert them kind of depending upon mismatches and things like that. So we've really kind of stuck with that. And I think it's provided great clarity for people when they come to the campus and we're recruiting them, because it's like, oh yeah, like I see it, like that's me, whereas I think maybe some other programs have been like, oh, well, depending on who we have is depending upon how we're going to play. And we haven't really done it that way here.
Yeah, it's so fun to watch because like I think the way to put it, like at least for me, the way that I've like evolved in seeing the game has been really fun because I used to always think like, okay, well, as soon as everything's happening with the Warriors, I'm like, all right, well, everything should be like, threes and layups is all you want.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun to watch and like also for me to just like get the understanding, like, okay, like obviously you have to maximize what you do best. It's not about like finding one certain way to play. Like everything's always dependent on your personnel and what you can do. And I mean, watching you guys against North Carolina in that, I think that was the third game of the season, second or
Yeah.
third game, I think.
Yep.
And that was the first time I'd seen you guys play. And I was like, right away, I was like, this is awesome. I was like, there are five players on the court that can all make decisions, that can all create, that can all draw the defense. And like, that's really hard to find. And that's really hard to build too, because I mean, again, like part of what stood out a lot is like, it's not just, okay, well, you can only shoot here, you can only shoot there. It seemed like you guys have really
Yep.
built in the ability for everybody to kind of play to their game, like especially with what you guys do out of the post, which I really love because like you guys and Creighton are both so good at like using the post to open up offense in a way that I think like so often whenever people think about like Creighton or just teams that play 4 out 1 in or 5 out more often, it's like, oh well, it's just shooting threes. But really what you guys want to do is collapse the defense and then create off of it. And I feel like that's actually a lot harder to do than people make it out to be. So what has it, like how do you go about kind of teaching this stuff? Especially like kind of reinforcing things throughout the year and like, this is a shot we want you to take. This is the stuff we want you
Yeah.
to work towards. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it really comes with clarifying like what type of shots you want to take, right? And so for us, we just define it as like we shots versus me shots.
Mhm.
And for us, a we shot is anything open, so anything that's open, or a 1v1 contest at the rim against somebody you can score against. So like for us, that's kind of the way we're trying to build things. And so, the other kind of saying we have is, 1-on-1, get it done. 1-on-2, it's not for you. So for us, it's like if you can draw two people and get two people to really guard you, that's the hardest thing to do in basketball, is to have the people resources be all on you and not on somebody else. And so, for us, we spend so much time on like starting things out with obviously having really good catch to shoot footwork, right? And making sure our kids get their eyes to the rim because you're most open on the catch. And so making sure we're really good at that decision making process. And then the next thing is, being able to drive and be able to finish 1v1, and developing all of the different ways that can happen. And, for some kids that are really small or, whatnot, that might be a little bit different than the bigger kids. Our bigger kids, we might just kind of be getting into Barclays and, doing that stuff with. Whereas the other kids, like we're really trying to kind of get past and work on more the Euro side of things to get around people versus the body to body stuff. Right. So, for that has some variability. It's like the more you can do, the more one-on-one get it done's you kind of have to do, right? But then it's about really the passing, right? And having the vision to realize when there's two people actually guarding you. Because if we can get an open shot, typically that means the other team's in rotation, which then means when we're tagging up, which is kind of the other thing that we do, we have a pretty high percentage chance of getting a rebound, out of that. So for us, it's just about building in kind of all the different ways, skill set wise, to get that done. And it really starts with how you catch the ball,
Mhm.
is and us trying to get as many clean catch, passes that we can shoot the ball off of. And then allow kind of whatever that choice is, whether it's shoot it, drive it, or move it, to happen as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and a really big part of that too. Like obviously I was stoked to see that she was coming back, but El Sutphin,
Yeah.
um I think it's interesting because like looking just, if you're looking at every roster in general, I think like the 4 spot is the spot where most teams just like do not have a consistent answer. So
Hmm.
having a player like Elle who like I mean I feel like she's obviously every player is crucial, but to me like the Elle is the one player I look at routinely. I'm like that's like just not somebody you can replace. Like having somebody who can credibly draw the defense out in the front court, who can attack off the dribble, who can be a post up threat and is not a negative passer, like that's really hard to find.
No,
And
for
she
sure.
does her work defensively too. So it's like
Yeah.
there's yeah, like I mean, especially with what you guys did with her coming off screens and like just there's a lot there to be excited about, but um like kind of baking in all of those things into an offense. Like obviously again, like you've a lot of these players have been together for a while, but in terms of like kind of making that fit and mesh together this year,
Yeah.
what was that like in terms of like kind of finding that from the get-go?
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time kind of just really like making sure everybody kind of understood on the catch what's a good idea, what's a bad idea, right? Like realizing if you have an advantage. And that's kind of
Hmm.
what we said is like, if it's a easy shoot it choice or an easy drive it choice, great. But like now let's be much better when it's like more neutral, and kind of saying, all right, well, this neutral thing's happening, and now like it's not really time for me. I need to wait for something else to happen. And so I think with us, we kind of used a lot of off-ball screening and also like ball screening, dribble handoffs, to kind of really skill our kids up at realizing like, hey, we need to bring two people together and we need to be great at separating and then trying to get two to guard one, right? And just getting our kids to really make those right reads, was something that Ellie thrived in because it's a hard choice, right? Like, you had Rosie Deegan and Ellie Sutphin involved in an interaction, and it's like, you had Mallory Haynes, Izzy Morgan, out there like on the perimeter spacing. And then you had Millie, who wasn't really shooting a ton of threes, but like you really can't ever be too far away from Millie because Millie's going to punk you if you do,
Hmm.
So it was like we had this great spacing. And Ellie just got so much better this year at making the right choice, like off of screens, making the right, setting screens at the right angles to be able to kind of get beneath people. And I think we had skilled up the others as well at being able to make those choices, where she could be just a great finisher. But late in the year, we were bringing her off of dribble handoffs because people were trying to kind of like slide under to just stay under us a lot, and just her versatility is just a bit of a killer for other people. But for her, it really started to click at the beginning of this year. Just if they do this, then I'm going to do that, versus being kind of on train tracks, or being predetermined. And so once she really dialed that in, you saw it against UNC, you saw it against Duke. I mean, it was incredible. They didn't really know what to do with somebody that was that good of a decision maker at that position.
Yeah, and it's really fun too, like you talk about with spacing. I think again, like so often with spacing, everybody just thinks playing 5 out and having a bunch of shooters. But like you said with Millie, I think Millie's one of the best decision makers on the team
Oh
because
my gosh, yeah.
she's so aggressive in everything she does. And like her and Ellie both, but in that Duke game, like I mean Duke, for people who were like not super tapped in, like their front court was impossible for a lot of teams to deal with. They had 2 players who were 6'5" that were both like really good as trigger players playing in the high post, but also awesome rim protectors. And they can hedge out and like they're both 6'5". And Ellie and Millie just gave them absolute fits on both ends. And it was sick to watch. And that's again because I was already excited after the UNC game. I didn't get to watch that one live, but then I was like, all right, I'm watching the Duke game live because I want to see this team play again. Um, but yeah, I think again, Millie's just like such a good point of remembering. Like at least for me, like spacing is just so much more about decision making to me
Mhm.
than shooting. Like shooting is helpful and
Yeah.
important, but like if you don't make decisions in the correct amount of time, defense is resetting. It doesn't matter. So, it's just the whole thing that goes into it. But I want to flip it too and talk about the defense because I think especially early on in the year before you guys dealt with injuries, like seeing what you guys are able to do defensively is what I really like about this
Yeah.
group. Like there are a lot of teams that can play offense, but they aren't able to play defense the way that you guys are able to. Like can play with real physicality, but also the switching was really timely. The backline rotations were awesome.
Yeah.
Um, Again, like setting that kind of stuff up, like how do you kind of what's like the most important thing to you in finding that consistency and having like a high switch defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does kind of talk or start with the idea of embracing physicality,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you're gonna whine because somebody's hitting you, or you're gonna whine like and always expect, like, you're probably just, gonna lose that physical battle, right? Like you just are. And, if you're gonna beat a Duke or have a chance to beat a Carolina, like, it's not that the referees are against you or not. It has nothing to do with that, but like you have to prove physically you belong, before you can have anything else happen. And so that was something that we spent a lot of time talking about, kind of coming from our Spain trip, because when we went to Spain this past summer, we dealt with older women. We were playing these pro teams over there that had, 35-year-olds, and they were just really, really physical. And some of our girls were like, they hit me. And it's like, yeah, that's like what you didn't sign up to play volleyball. Like you signed up to play basketball, so there's going to be physical contact. Like it's part of it. We got to be better at embracing it. And so for us, we spent a lot of time talking about that. And then really just built in this idea of, look, like we always just want to make the other team do one more thing, and use our length, use our size, use our physicality. But like, let's, make them do one more thing, and let's see if they can connect, well enough to like get a great shot over time. And so I think that was something that the switching did, is we always had somebody kind of in front of people. And we trusted that we had kind of enough size, athleticism, and toughness to like not really care who that was at any moment. And then really just, battle with the bigger post players, against Duke and Carolina even, we were able to front some people and just kind of be little and annoying. And, those bigs aren't always used to that, right? And so I think it's something people had to take into account, is like, hey, like, it's just not going to be super obvious who's guarding you all the time, right? Like I think some
Mhm.
teams go into games being like, hey, we're going to pick on this kid or pick on that kid. And for us, it's like, well, you're going to really have to like work kind of hard to get to that point, and have a lot of good players to do that. So it was fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. And going into the A10 too, like I think again, part of what's so fun about the A10 is like the styles are just so contrasting and different. Like VCU and George Mason were both so much about their guard play and what they could do attacking downhill. And then Rhode Island is like, I mean, Rhode Island is just so tough.
Yeah.
Like their physicality is nuts. Like Maya Torre, and I can't remember their second biggest name off the top of my head right now, but like
Yeah.
they just like their ability to attack mid post in is like
Yeah.
again very
Elite.
difficult to deal with. I mean St. Louis, obviously with what they did, but like when you have a defense that is like obviously good and versatile, how do you kind of keep adapting that throughout the year? Because I think like again, like you mentioned with on the offensive end, all right, well now teams are just going to try and go under a lot, really keep things in front. Like how do you keep adapting to that? And I feel like that definitely plays in on the defensive side as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to have enough like defensive decision-making flexibility, right? Of like, hey, we're not going to switch this because like we don't need to, from a matchup side of things. And so, there's certain screens that we don't switch. We have certain like hard rules, I would say, within what we're doing. But, for the most part, like we try to rep and practice like enough
Mhm.
defensive decision making as much as we can, where it's like, hey, like, should we switch this? Let's not, like if we can help it. But we always are ready to switch if needed. And so for us, we actually spent a lot of time kind of talking about peel switching, and really trying to never be in full rotation. Like if we can just handle somebody getting beat with two people versus having to engage three or maybe four, that's always going to be better for us, because from a rebounding side of things, to me, a lot of O boards are given up with bad defense, and a lot of bad defense comes from rotation. And so, we really built things around the idea of we want to have as few of closeouts as possible, and really want to be in as least amount of rotation as possible. And so that's kind of how we would decide game planning wise, is like, hey, like what do we need to do to have those two things happen the least amount? Because if we can, have that happen the least, then I think we can have, we're probably going to score enough points, right, to be able to beat a team or be in a game. So,
Yeah.
um, but I just don't think you can really like be in rotation a lot and be good at it. I
Yeah,
just
it's
think
really hard to
it's
always have yourself just on the move like that. And
yeah.
I feel like trying to stay as based up as possible is huge. I really like what you said about, decision making on the defensive end, because I think that goes undersold a lot. Like
Mhm.
I think people can see that on the offensive end and it's more apparent, but exactly like you're saying, I think so much of, especially in switching, is like just trying to take away space that screens create. Like if
Yep.
if you're getting screened, okay, well, what can we do to crunch down how much space there is there, or like what's coming from it? And like, yeah, there's a real IQ that goes into understanding and being able to do those things. So like, how do you like? Obviously, you mentioned like trying to rep things out, but how do you kind of improve defensive decision making, or is that something that you're like recruiting and like you really want to find players who like can see that stuff well already?
I think I think recruiting, some of it is important. It'd be like not fair to say one way or another, but
Yeah.
like Millie Pryor, I think is one of the best defensive players in our league.
Hmm.
And she would just do some things naturally in practice that like instinctually that no other player in our program had ever instinctually done, but then she kind of like can show people how to do it, right? And
Yeah.
so like I think a lot of players like learned from Millie a lot of things and had so much confidence to play because Millie was kind of like always back there. And so I do think some of it is recruiting, and recruiting certain length, certain size and people that like, I was out there watching games all weekend and it's like the kids that are complaining to the refs because they like were bumped. It's like, that's not the kid for me. Like we're going to constantly be in those scenarios here. And like, you got to just be like kind of excited to hit people, not mad that it's happening. And so I think it's a combination, it's that recruiting side. And then in a practice setting, it's like just making sure we rep it enough that they like have confidence they can do it. We had some freshmen that early on were like, what do you mean you want me to, guard the post player doing this? And it's like, over time, like they actually realized like they were pretty good at it, or they got to
Hmm.
see somebody else be pretty good at it. And we just really talk about it a lot of, like we're not normal, like a lot, like not many teams choose to do what we're doing. And so, you know, it's hard for somebody when something has to work completely differently in our game versus the games they've had maybe against others. Like we change sort of like the timing of a lot of people's stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, like I mean that's another aspect. Like you guys don't play crazy pace, which I appreciate because I
Yeah.
think there are like I understand like every coach is going to come out and say like, "Ah, we're going to play with pace, we're going to do this, we're going to do that." But like I think part of what set you guys apart is that you were playing so much more in control and like
Yeah.
patient. But again, like it's not always easy to do that. So it's just, it's exciting when you can find teams that can do that blend. Um, but moving from there too, obviously, like we talked about off top, like this year was it a long haul, like a very difficult year with respect to injuries and the way that went. And as a coach, how do you kind of A, handle that in the moment, and B, how do you kind of reflect on that as the year ends? Like obviously, I know that's not something you have control over, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, as a coach going through it in season, I just had so much respect for, our young women, like, and just how they showed up every day. And we're so adaptable and coachable. And, like, all right, coach, if you want me to do, you need me to do that, like, I got you. It was just really like this, like, united front of like, hey, we know this isn't optimal. We know this isn't ideal, but like, we are going to do the best we possibly can and figure it out. And so I thought the problem solving ability collectively was really good. And just something I was really proud of because I think that's something I take a lot of pride in is being a good problem solver and
Mm,
not getting too rattled. And I just was really proud of how steady our players were kind of through that. But it was really hard. I think that's just kind of the thing is, having some of your closest friends like go down with season-ending injuries, kind of going through that and seeing people go through surgery and all their rehab and all of that stuff, I think, really weighed on our players. I think, we obviously had to make a tough decision at that end to kind of cancel things. And, I would say like this was the most competitive group I've ever been around and probably the hardest thing to like come to terms with. But we were all very much on the same page at that point in time with like, hey, we actually are like at the end of like what we can be doing right now. Like this is, to a point we just really couldn't continue. But it was hard, but I wouldn't have wanted to do it with any other group of people,
mhm.
and I think that's why, we still had some success there during that end stretch where, really a ton of adversity had hit in.
Yeah, no, I remember. I mean, as soon as the GMU game happened, that you guys ended up beating them, I was like, yeah. And I mean, I don't mean this just to blow smoke, but for real, like watching you guys this year, I think it was just really impressive and very fun to watch. Obviously, fun to watch the games. I mean, but like getting to see that process of you guys still kind of figuring out things and being there in each game, like it's just a lot easier said than done. And like one of the things on top of that too, like I mean, I like I knew who Charlize was coming into the
Yeah.
year because she was a pretty highly rated recruit coming into to Virginia Tech. Um, I was obviously very impressed with her as the year started off because like I just feel like she brings such a different dynamic. Like obviously fits within what you guys do, but also like, again, like when one of my favorite things to do is like early on in the year, I just kind of go crazy. Like I shut myself in and watch as many games as possible because I want to know like, how do these teams work? What players are taking steps? How are things looking? And like so you guys are doing what you do, and then Charlize comes off the bench. She's like, "Oh, all right." She's getting the side step stuff. She's like doing this. She's doing that, and like, watching her kind of grow in that starting role as the year went on too. Before she was injured, was like that was really impressive stuff to watch. Like that's the kind of thing you watch, and you're like, "Wow, okay, that's a player that I'm keeping tabs on for the next couple of years because the sky's the limit for her." Um, what are you most excited about for her moving forward?
I think Charlize is just a really unique kid. She is wonderful to be around. In her spare time, she plays Fortnite, so she's, like just a different kid, and I think that what I saw this year from her was just a coachability
Mhm.
as the season went along. When I said this to her kind of in our end of year meeting, but she was like, I think you can be a little bit harder on me. And I'm like, okay, like, okay. I said, I like part of the reason, like, you're a new player here. Like, I want to kind of make sure, hey, we're like getting on the same page and like you understand before I'm like being critical, right? But like she really just wants to be coached. I think that's the big thing is she really like when you're like, hey, I need you to do this instead of that, there's just none of this like, oh, well, like any type of rebuttal or anything. It's just like, okay. And she just really evolved into being a better passer, being a better reader of things, being a better continuer. As the season went along, she kind of went a little higher on the scouting report of other teams. And so I was like, hey, it's going to be a little harder for you to get easy stuff. You're going to have to be better with your cuts. You're going to have to be better with your, finishing ability. You're going to have to be better at the shots you're taking. And because otherwise there's going to be more people resources with you, and so for her it was a process, but just one that like was just really natural, and really I think exciting as we move forward because you got to see some talent that she has like when it all kind of starts to come together, toward the end, where I do think she can be one of the most special players to play in the A10.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because exactly like you're saying, like it felt like, you could see the stuff where like it wasn't necessarily always in the flow of your guys' offense early on. But I think part of that, like it's interesting because I feel like there's a balance where it's like, all right, having this ability, like there is just not a lot of people who can defend that. And it's awesome when it's hitting, but like how do you kind of mesh those two things? And it felt like she really figured that out towards the end, especially the reading on like second and third level stuff that wasn't necessarily there at the beginning of the year. So yeah, I'm very excited to continue to watch that. I'm very excited to watch you guys moving forward. Gayle, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate what you guys are doing and how you go about it. And just can't wait to see what you guys do this next year.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You're doing awesome things for women's basketball.
Thank you. I
So
appreciate
just
that.
keep it up and just really appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. To everyone listening, thank you for listening. Of course, keep up with all things Davidson women's basketball and have a great rest of your day.